Talk about social media and best practices in content management. Content was the basis of a lot of the discussions that we were hearing earlier today, and as Don was talking about, really boiling it down to the very basis, you have to have something to put in the channel, and content has always really been a challenge. So how do you think about content? What is the overall corporate strategy? I've heard a lot of them today. Some of them sound an awful lot like engineering or plumbing. You got to get the right pipes aligned, and then you got to get the right pressure, and then you've got to have concerns about whether or not you're going to be interacting and what those junctures are going to be like. Or maybe it's a lot like gardening. So I heard it's a lot of organic stuff today. And how are you putting together your garden, and what are you doing to nurture it? And there are different elements and things that will grow. People who will become naturally involved, who are your natural in getting down to your ultimately your evangelists. Or is it like the strategy that was just discussed? So is it football? And is it, can you lay out your game plan and make your content and how you will put it together, and who will do it, and what happens when you finally initiate it, and then you have to punt or do something different. So is it gardening? Is it football? Is it or is it a combination of all three? And if it is a combination, most likely, what is the optimal? What does it optimally look like? If I could draw this in such a way that it was constantly moving, like plumbing, it would feed in on itself. That there would be stuff that would be going out, content that would be put out in a variety of ways. But it would also be coming in. So there's a constant flow here. It's appropriate that we're at Nissan to mention the concept of Kaizen. Introduced in the 90s. So continuous process improvement means you're listening and you're getting feedback from the things that you have done. So because you've put out content into the world, there is reaction to it. You should be capturing that, putting it back through your machination, whether this is the garden, the electrical system, the plumbing, but you are going to be storing your data for when you need it to create things, to create content. You're going to be preserving that. Sometimes you're going to be outsourcing some of your content. It's not necessarily going to come from within. But on the scale of paid, earned, and owned media, the owned media really is the content piece. And this is sort of an optimal design. You capture from a variety of sources. You have the platforms, I heard that earlier, to support, and the infrastructure, really, how the processes to handle it. You have the ability to retain it, and you have the ability to then archive it, dispose of it, really to be able to control your content, and that includes the timing of it. I had a very interesting conversation with a marketer who said, why is Snapchat so important? Anybody a Snapchat user here? Yeah. Your stuff disappears very quickly. Right? Why would it be important for a brand to advertise on that? Well, the only people who would click through would be those who would be really interested right away. So maybe there's some immediacy factors. You've seen dozens of these, so I'm not going to bore you, but there is a circular nature to this content control and management. You have to have the pieces in order to do it. And if you're in an enterprise, you're dealing with one or more of these repositories. You're managing web content or documents or images or records or all of the above as part of your overall structure, how you're putting things together. This must be, there we go. And the platform, I believe, is a technology piece. There are processes around it. There's actual management, which was going to involve people, process, technology. You're not going to get away from that. Let's go forward. It's going backwards. How's that possible? Okay, and now, because of social media, your content really is involved in a number of different operations, and some were addressing this earlier. It was reputation, an amount of information that you're creating and sharing, but there are more aspects to this. It's a bigger diamond. There's a lot more pieces to look through. Someone mentioned earlier the brand relationships, the critical, because of what you are doing, it is part of the brand, it is part of your identity, the conversations that are occurring. How many people have a social media policy for their company? How many people have a social media style guide, which is a combination of a policy and kind of a consumer manual You don't have that yet? Think about it, because you can't really have one of these things, the conversations, and how are you going to be able to control that if you're not giving some direction? What tools are you using? I wish we were gardening. I wish we were gardening, because this would be great. Just give me a rake, and I'm going to go out. In fact, after I get finished with the .com revolution, I'm going to go back to dirt farming. But so the tools that you have to use in social are just a little bit more complex. And adding to this giant complexity is, as I'm sorry, whoever explained it earlier, you have to use individual tools for individual areas, as opposed to having, let's say this is Forrester's recommendation, one tool that would help you to bring all of these 5 C's together. It's an excellent presentation, I thought, because this is the problem that we're facing. This is the complexity of the day. And this is right now. I mean, I'm guessing that in 18 months this looks entirely different. And if you don't think it's going to look entirely different, you're fooling yourself. But thank goodness you're not in China. So it could be like, anybody in China, working in China? No. All right, could be like this. Could be even more complex. We're talking about publishing, sharing, networking, and discussing, and we have to sort of be platform neutral, because really, if you're not following the consumer, you have to follow wherever the consumers. They're really making the determination, and we're hopefully being there before the wave crashes. And notice that it's a small piece of a much larger digital complexity, and that's why we need the football. That's why we need the playbook. All right. So assuming that we are going to be able to utilize these tools, and we have the right people doing them, what's the play? How are we going to be able to react, and what areas are we going to need to be able to react in? So an effective playbook is one that includes all of really I think these are necessities for being able to move your program forward. You have to have learning, listening, engaging, measuring, and refining. If you aren't developing capabilities, I thought that was impressive earlier, yes, you must be taking experiments. Defining your activities. And for the larger enterprises, and how many are in government-regulated industries? A couple? A few more? Okay, all right, so yet another level of complexity. I want to talk a little bit about governance and how how the federal regulations are handled. But ultimately, your playbook has to be able to react from a content management standpoint to all of these. You're planning, you're listening, engaging, you're identifying your workflow, you're working it, you're finding your targets, and hopefully you have the right people and organization doing this. So you can get your content out into the variety of channels. You can integrate with more than one system. You are, in fact, using all, including your paid media, to achieve those goals. If you're doing this content correctly, it's aligning with your product and your business messaging, and your SEO is then being improved by it. How many people have done content where it's actually damaged your SEO? Anybody had that experience yet? No. So your content is not applicable to your audience, where you are not getting the appropriate hits or the amount of traffic from your keywords, because you're not, you have somehow, and many companies do not do this, monitor the keywords on a weekly or daily basis and then feed that back into your content generation system. Absolutely important for SEO. Being able to map out your content according to the business cycle. Nissan's is a very long cycle. It's a much larger purchase. Some of your the other folks here are selling much shorter cycle purchases, consideration in hours rather than days and months. And so there's an element of being able to balance out your content so you are delivering effective messages regardless of where individuals are on the purchase consideration cycle. And this, I think, is the most important. Somebody mentioned Comcast, also Southwest, turned their organizations around. Literally, the effect of the brand, the value of the brand increased so dramatically with the effective use of social and customer service. But it is one of the hardest ones to integrate. Anybody have a separation of church and state currently, where the customer service is not doing anything on the social? That's okay, because most companies face that. That's a stepping stone along the way of development. And so we'll talk about the plumbing now. What does a company need? What kind of plumbing are you going to have in order to support your ability to manage content across your enterprise so that you've really got all of the bases covered? And in order to cover that, you have the technology backing it up. So at the center, a digital asset management system and a media asset management system and processes, but this is the technology that sits on top of your storage, your backup, whatever your cloud is, and incorporates all the other management systems that you have for whatever your other content might be, whether it's mobile, whether it's print, whatever it has to be, that you have this. And I want to talk a little bit about this matrix. So in the larger enterprises, whoever said it earlier, it's really a team effort. It's really a team effort. And by team, I mean not stakeholders whose interests are not necessarily aligned and with whom you're going to have to be doing a lot of consensus building. That kind of team, I mean. And number one, on the information systems, having the content management, as we talked about, the platform, the policies, and then administrative support to do it. Publishing and engagement, editorial, according to an editorial calendar. How many use editorial calendars? Yeah? And anybody just wing it? Interesting. Do you have in your editorial calendars a methodology for serendipity? Meaning, the lights go out at the Super Bowl and you're ready to do that Oreo dunking. How many have that in place yet? Okay. Yeah. Communications and outreach, publishing, editorial, and content production. Did you want to mention something about this?
Yeah, actually, you know, I bet y'all thought this was the Penn and Teller show. He's the vocal one. But I do have a wealth of experience in this area, and you know, my experience. As far as best practices go, traditionally the marketing department has been the one giving direction to social media. Is not just about deployment. The social aspects of business cut across the entire grain of the organization. So you need to start with really a content strategy and then have social at the table, because you could be wasting a lot of money producing assets that are not deployable through social. And where I've experienced it as well is that content is published and it has a bad reaction publicly, and then you need to have your social media team on hand and your legal departments and whatnot on hand for the triage or whatever backlash there may be. But be careful when you're working out your plans and strategies and your budgets to make sure to have social involved in this content strategy. That's where I would recommend you first start. We'll start with necessarily a social strategy, because all business is social and it cuts across the grain of the organization. So, and then also, you know, strategizing campaigns is another example. I've literally had someone call me up at 4 o'clock in the evening and say, we've put together this campaign that's going to run for the next 12 months. We need a social media strategy by tomorrow. That's not how it works. You start off conceptualizing the idea, and then you say, okay, well, you have this concept, this idea, and these opportunities to create content for these different channels. Oh, and by the way, these different channels have different criteria or strategies that work. Say, for example, using YouTube for educational content. We're not going out there and marketing and selling products. So what you just put together and spent $50,000 producing doesn't fit that channel, and that's where you want it. It's not going to happen. So there could be a lot of unhappy stakeholders and a lot of money spent if you're not bringing your social media people to the table to conceptualize programs and content. So start there. That's all I want to say about that.
Thank you. And as you're building and you develop this and you have a strategy for moving forward, there is a learning curve. So organizations will go through transition. And these transitions if you think in the first stage where it's really sort of within a department or within a large, you don't have to involve other areas, you don't have to build that consensus among stakeholders. You can improve or optimize existing processes. At some point, you need, in order to move past just moving from convenience to efficiency, to be able to gain competitive advantage, to be able to enable your content management processes. You're going to have to involve some budget, you're going to have to involve other areas of the organization, you're going to build that consensus. And as you move towards enterprise-wide strategies, that is really involving the technology, the business process, the adaptation, and ultimately, if it's not led by the leadership of the company, not bringing it in, that it certainly is doomed for failure. You really want to have a full buy-in in order to move so that the entire enterprise moves towards the value creation, so that you really are developing whole new core competencies in addition to competitive advantages. So there is a growth curve within this space for organizations. Cisco handles their social media by dividing, having a central advisory council, that is one that helps to determine that social media policies, social style guides, what's custom or should be done. And then there's there's actually three separate areas, one for the communications, one for customer-facing side, really another for more on the marketing side of things. So however you decide to divide up the pie of business, there are companies that are incredibly successful at handling content, that have done it exceptionally well over the years. And they do have some things in common. And one of the things that they have in common, all of these above, is a workflow that they follow religiously on the development of content. So as Michelle pointed out earlier, the strategy is determined up front. That is, that drives really everything else. And then the individuals who are responsible for these have a dramatic effect, or can have a dramatic effect on the workflow, because you know exactly where it's going.
Exactly. Establish centers of excellence, too, if you haven't thought about that. I mean, it's very helpful for the large-scale enterprises.
And just share it. On the general, we have resolved that problem through a number of different ways. We have automated as much as possible. We have looked at revising and bringing in not only new technology pieces that we're evaluating now, but also individuals who have the capability, who have the analytics side, who can be, and then not by all discounting the creative. So the creative is ultimately important. I believe that is the thing that was the effective piece, the thing that people remember, and the thing that, and it works the same way in a variety of media. So we have an opportunity now, because the American General was bought by, pardon me, the General was bought by American Family Insurance. American Family is a much larger company. The General is very limited in its scope and in its focus, whereas American Family, much larger. And so has some of those issues and problems related to federal regulation that we addressed earlier. Did you want to mention what these folks have to do?
Oh, yes. Stand up, Jill. Jill's out here. She's not here officially with the Fainting Goat Farm, but she is officially here with the IG. You may not be a highly regulated industry like our industry is, but you might still be concerned with the compliance. And in our case, we're dealing with people who have immediate deaths in the family, and you need to respond and listen and monitor the situations, and you need to watch out. In my case, for people sharing their Social Security numbers or other personal information through social media channels, you need to protect your customers. So having programs in place, or the infrastructure, the platforms I say are like Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and so forth, and then the infrastructures like all the plumbing and the pipes that manage the flow and archive and listen and monitor and enable users to respond. But you should really contemplate having that infrastructure in place to listen to what's happening and to do the real-time lead generation. We have gone through lots of iterations with our programs, developing, how do you do this? There you go. Certain best practices. Check your policies. Do this on a regular basis, and form teams for the governance of your social media activities among your employee base or agents. In our case, then train your staff, have a training program, or maybe even contemplate a brand ambassador program. We have to train our employees who are agents to go out and engage and make sure that they know how to manage social media and how to triage a situation should one arise. And then
how many people have training programs already in existence, training social media? You're training your employees on social media.
I think if you go with Sprinklr, they'll help you with that. Then select the channels and make that part of your policy to say that this is the channels that we are authorizing you as an ambassador to use. Click. Okay. And then select the right tools or the infrastructure that you're going to use, which would include your listening program, and make sure that you have an empowered staff so long as they know what the rules are, the best practices are. And you're listening for those, have a lexicon established for things that you need to be watching out for. Empower your staff. And then connect the multiple channels and prioritize your business objectives, what it is you want to do. And since we're talking about content, create the content for them to go out and to be effective. And then give them some leeway as well to be personable through social media, because it's all about relationships. And then where you can, automate certain activities like creating the content, making it available at this period of time, and then making it come down for this period of time. Say, for example, you have a campaign that runs for Valentine's Day. Meet the customer's expectations. Like I said, for my particular line of business in the real world, you don't want to delay on a response to a customer. This is one of the most tragic times of their life. So if you're going to allow people to go out and interact in social media on your behalf, make sure that they're meeting the customer's expectations and not damaging your brand, because it can happen. And we advise our employees not to be a stalker. Listen and engage thoughtfully, and don't just jump into the conversation without having had any kind of other interaction. Follow them, get to know them, and then use your infrastructure that you've got to gain customer insight. As I said, social media cuts across the grain of the operation. We have had a lot of learnings that we've been able to attain from our social engagements. Take, for example, when we know that something is going to change with customers and their policies, and you need to send out a mass volume of mail, the phone lines may go down. And you know what happens when the phone lines go down? They go to social media. You better be staffed for it, because it's going to get a lot of complaints.
And then there are new things coming around the bend. Anybody go to CES? No? All right. So the biggest thing at CES, wearables. And what does this have to do with content? Does anybody have a Fitband? Nike Fitband or one of those sorts of things? I think it has a lot to do with content. I think people are very interested not only in themselves, but in each other, and the wearables might help get people there. I think wearables also work with telematics. And if I were a car company, I'd be thinking about how the telematics in a car might be actually very important to us as a generator of some sort of content. For the individuals who might be interested, not only for the insurance companies also might be interested. So there's other things. Your content, we didn't even begin to scratch the surface of mobility. How many people are mobile optimized for every piece of their content? Social media and whatnot. And yeah. Okay, so mobile is here. You can't deny it any longer. Time to get and there's a intelligent assistance, artificial intelligence. How many people talk to Siri? Anybody Siri users here? Okay, you talk to Siri. Are you getting Are you getting used to that? Do you like that? Do you like to interact that way with the device? Because there's a lot of intelligent assistants coming right down the line, and so content will have to adjust accordingly. People may want to have things read to them rather than reading them themselves. There's a tremendous number of innovations, and a lot of times, I feel going even to conferences like this, that it's really more like the blind guys trying to describe the elephant. And two of them think it's small and slender, one thinks it's like a tree. And so as we were working with social media, I think more opportunities to share like this. And as well at the local organization, the meetings will get less snake oil sales and more viable information being exchanged. We're running up against our time. I want to make sure we have, we're on our tour as quickly as possible.
We do have a few minutes for questions.
Questions?
I have a question. How many people here are using Jelly? The app Jelly? No?
Jelly, does anyone know what that is?
One person. Hey, Carlos, represent. Oh, and by the way, Skittles. I love Skittles. I don't eat them, but I follow them. Any questions?
Tell us about Jelly. You just can't.
Jelly. Okay.
How many people have used Quora? You know what Quora is, right?
Quora's
Where you
all that.
answer, or ask.com, where you ask and answer questions. So Jelly is a mobile-only app. It's not on the desktop, and it presents one question at a time, and for you to answer.
You take a picture of something, and then you ask the question. You can draw a circle around it. And GE has been using it for marketing.
Crowdsourcing answers. It's sort of like that, and it's an interesting experience. It's different than going onto the Quoras or the Asks. I highly suggest that you try it. In fact, with all mobile technology or any kind of thing, I highly suggest that you be users of it before you begin building the strategies.
I expect them to bring down the network now and downloading that. My job is not complete until that happens.
Very good. Any other questions?
All right, well, find us on the Faith and Go Farm.
Yes, or LinkedIn or whatever.